Header Footer Gallery is part of the New Media Caucus and is dedicated to promoting the creative output of our members by situating their work in thoughtfully curated exhibitions that take place across our entire web presence. New Media Caucus is an international nonprofit association formed to promote the development and understanding of new media art. We represent and serve artists, designers, practitioners, historians, theorists, educators, students, and scholars. Recognizing new media art to be inherently interdisciplinary, multimodal, and evolving, we support and advance a wide range of inquiry to catalyze further evolution of the field. The New Media Caucus is committed to extending and sustaining the diversity of our community, board, and membership, to promote an environment of equality, inclusion, and respect for difference. We prioritize inclusion as an ongoing collaborative process of growth that we continually address both within the caucus and in our field.
Welcome, everybody, to the 20th episode of Heather Footer Presents. I'm your host, Rene.
And I'm your co-host, Constanza.
And before anything else, we want to thank you for your patience while Constanza and I got settled in our respective new apartments, and in my case, country. Today, we will be talking about post-internet art, what it is, why some are opposed to it, and then we'll give our own opinions on it. Anyhow, let's begin. So, post-internet art. The first thing I want to mention is this is our cover, and there's a very good reason for this. Post-internet art, I don't want to give a definition yet. I want to do that at the very end. But basically, what I can tell you is that it's steeped in the culture of late 1990s and early 2000s, hence the Lana Del Rey meme Tumblr thing, this is a very distinctive image. It's very characteristic of Tumblr of the time, before it exploded. So first, we're going to talk about Marisa Olsen and the birth of post-internet. Marisa Olsen is the first person to talk about post-internet, and she does this as a way to recognize how her practice functions. And one of the things is that what she says is that the internet can no longer be distinguished as a strictly computer internet base, but rather can be identified as any type of art that is in some way influenced by the internet and digital media. Basically, what she's saying is that now we're surrounded by the internet. Everything we do has in some way to do with it. And therefore, art can no longer be just computer art. It is in part, everything you do is in part influenced by this, okay? So this is from an article, which is by Luis Dulas, which is called We Make Money, Not Art. There's also other people who have spoken about the concept, obviously, after reading what Marisa Olsen said. In the 2008 Rhizome interview with curator Thomas Bird of Internet Aware Art, that's one of the things. It's Internet aware art means that it doesn't have to be digital. It doesn't have to exist on a computer. It doesn't have to exist digitally. Simply, it has to be aware of the culture around it. So when you see an artist that makes reference to memes, for example, or when they use certain aesthetics, they're recognizing the influence of the internet on their practice, on their world, on their existence, right? And finally, curator Jean McHugh sees the post-internet situation as one in which the internet is less of a novelty and more of a banality, a presence that is now a given, generally less phenomenal phenomenon. So basically, it no longer is like a novelty. It no longer is the thing. And I think that kind of explains a little bit what happened with internet art. And this is where I'm going to let Constanza say something about this.
Yeah, I think just from what you've mentioned so far, and from reading this really great interview, which I can link, anywhere else, would you argue then that everything made now is post-internet art then? If everything is, you know what I mean? And this is something that is being argued by, I'll tell you his name right now, um, Parker and Anne, in a very interesting interview. What was post-internet art? Which is weird because they're already talking about how it was a thing. and
Yeah.
perhaps it's not a thing anymore, which is really interesting. It's post internet, right? Um, in any case, that's one of the arguments that they make, right? That everything that is created now is post-internet, any type of artwork, because it has been influenced by digital culture and the internet and things like that. And kind of like how you were saying too, it doesn't have to be digital, right? It can just reference memes or any part of internet culture and um, yeah, things like that as well. But what I found so fascinating about post-internet art is the self-awareness that is given and that artists have. Because prior to this, in like early 1980s or 1990s, early 1990s, net art, it was very experimental, right? I teach a class on internet art, among other things, and the most basic thing that I show my students is GeoCities and how yeah, I go through the whole thing, talk about the neighborhoods, and how you can create your own website, right, based on these neighborhood names, right? Um, so, for example, if you created one that was based on sci-fi, your neighborhood or where your website would be located would be called Area 51, for example, which is really cool.
That.
Pardon?
I forgot about all that.
Yeah, a lot of people do. But what's interesting about it is that early internet art was very experimental. I wouldn't say they were necessarily something like self-aware about it being. I think it was more of an opportunity for artists to create artists, experimenters, because I wouldn't necessarily call them all artists, right? But people that were computer savvy as well. They experimented with the conditions and the opportunities that internet offered, right? Which was why it was so creative. And now what you see is very corporate or Web 2.0, very corporate style of design. And you can see this in like website design, which is so boring in comparison to what it looked like in the past, right? Um, but that's just a little bit about internet art, I think. And like I said, just to remind everyone, it was an opportunity for artists to congregate, form communities on the internet, which was something that was so basic and so integral as an essence to early internet art and early internet communities, right? As a gathering place, but also to share information. Another one, share information. There's a really great archive called Net. I'm trying to remember. There's the Net Art Mythology that everyone uses right now to archive early internet art. Um, but there was another archive that I've used for my research that actually chronicles all the interactions. Like it was a bulletin board system, right? So people actually archived the conversations that they had with each other. And what's cool about this archive is that you get to see the different discussions, the topics that were really popular at the time, and how people organized to create politically based artworks, on the internet, even offline as well. So these things exist. The Wayback Machine exists for a reason, right? Um, but yeah, so all of this was novel, right? And which is something that, like you were saying, the novelty has sort of been what do you say? The novelty has been erased, right, from internet art now in digital culture, I think, because it has become so banal. So I definitely agree with that statement.
Yeah, I think it's worn out and it's natural. The other thing is, and I think we don't talk about that enough, is that one of the reasons like net art itself disappeared is the birth of the CMS, the content management system. So things like
Mhm.
WordPress or all these websites that let you make websites, and this recursiveness and the dependency on templates kind
Mhm.
of dulled the internet. Like in a way, it's good. I know, but it's good because it allows anyone to have a website. Because before that, you had to learn HTML, CSS, blah blah blah. Nowadays, just click. I want it orange. I want this in this font. I want this in this. I want this, and then if you want something more reactive, then you hire someone. But in general, anybody can have a website that looks professional, which has the unfortunate consequence of making everything homogeneous and like everything looks like the same. And that's part of why
Mhm.
internet art died. And the other, well, not died, but it's like on life support. And the other one is that honestly, like if we don't teach our students HTML and CSS and all these things, so they don't see the internet the same way. They don't see the code. They don't see those things. And I think that's part of what makes anything now post internet, because now we're in the era of social media that's very walled off. So Facebook exists within itself. It's not like you can Google. Well, Google's been going down the drain lately with a search, but it's never been able to index Google. It's never been able Google, Facebook has never been able to index Instagram. It's never been able to index Twitter. Well, Twitter sorta, but yeah. So
You
it
mean X?
makes sorry.
You mean X?
Uh, I don't know what the X is. Uh, I do, but it's ideological. Anyway, so I think one of the things is that's what sort of killed internet art, and it's also what gave way to this a situation where talking about the inner workings of the thing is no longer interesting. It's just a server running in one of Amazon's servers, if you think about it. And rather we focus or shifted to a more aesthetics based system, I think, which some people seem to not like, some people do. It's contentious. I understand that. But we've seen this kind of movements constantly, right? Like you have you have the Renaissance, and then in response to the Renaissance, you have the Baroque, which is totally the opposite of it. Then you have neoclassical, and then you have romanticism. So I think in a way we are in a romantic period of the internet. Post-internet is the romantic period to the net arts renaissance, you could say. I don't know if you want to add
Hmm.
something to that or
I don't
correct.
know if I agree necessarily.
All right, hit me.
No, only okay, because now we're gonna get into like art history, so I'd rather not. But um, um, I don't know if I would necessarily categorize it as that, but I do believe in the pendulum swing of art, but also in the history. It's in yeah, in terms of history, I believe in the pendulum swing.
Yeah,
So I wonder, and this is something I also ask my students, how do you think digital culture, digital media, and technologies are going to look like in 20 years? Like, are we still going to follow this corporate, very streamlined, this very homogenous, this very sterile almost, right? Aesthetic? Because it is in some regards an aesthetic. Or are we going to revert back to more creative and experimental choices, design choices like the early 90s had, right? And that's all part of the pendulum swing. So
yeah.
that's a really interesting case, and we'll see that in a couple of years, maybe in like 10, 20 years, right?
I mean,
Um, we'll see, right?
yeah,
One would hope.
I guess, yeah. I mean, by the way, I didn't mean to say like Baroque had no ideological backing. By the way, just that aesthetically, it was like the complete opposite of the Renaissance, right? And you
Sure,
see
yeah.
this even in things like uh, classical and what's the one that follows? Hellenic art. Like you have this very somber classical art, and then immediately after, as a reaction to it, you have this, which it is more visual. Like that's the one thing. It is more visual. It still has ideologies, still has values and things. It is still like political and whatever you want to call it. But for example, like Hellenic art was considered for a long time like inferior because it was much more dramatic, much more flashy, and I think the same happens with Baroque, and the same criticisms are we're going to see here in the post-internet thing, because this is one of the other things. I think post-internet art is not developing itself in the traditional art spaces that we expect. So
Hmm.
this is like a dichotomy and a contradiction that you see a lot in the art world with professionals all the time. Like we're all, and I include myself in this. Like we're always complaining that there's like artists are not pushing the barriers and artists are not looking at such and such. But we're only looking within the traditional art spaces, right? Um,
Hmm.
while we ignore, for example, YouTube, we ignore things like Poppy, which is someone I've been like following in their career for a while. Uh, I'm thinking I can't play this because if I do, we're gonna get a copyright strike. But basically, Poppy, this video is called Industrial Plant. Industry plant. Do you know what an industry plant is?
Mm-mm.
No? Okay. So industry plant is a term in music spaces, mostly Reddit and TikTok, which is like Tumblr 2.0. And one of the things is like when people feel that an artist is not grassroots, they accuse them of being an industry plant, which is basically an artist that has backing by by a record company.
Recording.
They have a contract, they have marketing,
Hmm.
blah blah blah. But that's natural and normal, right?
Yeah.
That's like I mean, you don't. The Rolling Stones had a contract. The Beatles had a contract. The I mean, I don't want to say this band because it's going to be offensive to some. I'm trying to think. The Dead Kennedys, for example. The Dead Kennedys are a punk band. Rage Against the Machine are arguably a punk band as well. And they all had marketing and contracts and record deals and all these things. So,
Mhm.
sorry?
No, hmm,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
agreeing.
So what Poppy is doing in this video specifically is that she shows you two plants. One is a plastic plant, the other one's a natural plant, and she's talking about metaphorically about this discussion, right? So she's commenting on this debate that's going on in the music business. She is part of the music business. She is the most literal definition of a industry plant, but at the same time she's not because she's never been like hugely successful, but she's always been manufactured on purpose. That's the whole business or image of Poppy, that she is this uh, even let's say computer generated person to a degree. So anyhow, going back to what I'm saying is like we don't look at Poppy's performances, which are performances, like in the most traditional of terms, and we don't look at that as something that should go in a museum. We just see it as, oh, this is pop culture, right? And that's one of the things that I think post internet is it's in part vastly informed by pop culture and the values and the things that we see there, right? But I don't know. What do you think?
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think that pop culture always has a certain quality in which it influences any other type of media, right? But especially now that pop culture is so readily accessible and disseminated via digital culture, so it works in two ways, right? Um, it's greatly facilitated by digital media. So every meme, every TikTok, everyone knows about it. Or at least, people that are online, right? They know about it. And so that's how you get virality, right? So I think that definitely is the case in this particular example for sure.
And you touch on something which we were talking earlier, like before we started recording, which is mass intelligentsia, which is this idea that well, intelligentsia used to be is this concept about like who are the cultural and like ideological movers of a space. So it used to
Yeah.
be writers, philosophers, all these people, and the stereotype that held until the 80s, I think, was people who would hang out in coffee shops or concert venues. They would sit down or like in an artist's house and have these discussions on art and values and philosophy. And then they would go home or to their universities and they would write and they would generate the culture. And that's how, what's his name? This philosopher you like?
Sartre,
Sorry?
Heidegger. I could name a whole bunch of them.
I mean, yeah, Foucault. I was thinking of
Foucault and
Foucault and
Foucault et al.
yeah. So everybody thinks about these people, right? And they're wondering, like, and you hear it all the time, like, what happened to this? Where are all, like, why don't we have these intelligentsia things? And the thing is, we do have them. It's just they moved online. And surprise, it's Tumblr, it's Second Life, it's Minecraft, it's YouTube, it's TikTok, it's Instagram, all
Yeah.
these places. And I think that the more, how do I say this? 'Cause I'm not trying to be despective, I'm trying to be descriptive. Like, the more entrenched into traditional academia someone is, the more derisive they can be about this, right? They see it as, well, no, they're just children. But we forget, like, how young people were back then doing life-changing things, right? Like, when we talk about Mary Shelley, she was like, what, 16, 17? And she
Hmm.
wrote the first science fiction novel, right? And these people work together in a house just messing around. And the only reason we have Frankenstein, Dracula, blah, 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 is because all these people got bored because it was raining outside. They were kids on a camping trip, basically. Well, not kids, but
Hmm.
Uh, and this also applies to history. Like, when people talk about, like, the American Revolution, like, you always picture George Washington as a 50-year-old, at least. Pretty much everyone involved in the American Revolution was in their 20s, like early 20s, like 20, 22. Burr, that from Hamilton and Burr, they were
Hmm.
21 and 22, I think. So
Hmm.
even the actors playing them in the musical that everybody loves, they're too old to play them. So
Hmm. Yeah.
we forget it. It's always been kids. It's kids that, or, well, we say kids, but it's not kids. It's young adults. Young adults have been moving culture, and they're doing it. They're just doing it in a place that we don't like, and that's the the mass intelligentsia. It's these people creating here.
Why don't we like them?
I don't know. Well, you hear, like, the discussions, right? Like, wait, what's happening here? Oh, it's because it's a link. Oh my god. Hold on. This is gonna create problems. It's not letting me skip to the next slide.
Just
There we
go
go.
to, there you go.
There we go. So, one of the definitions that I've heard of this post-internet is that it's a post-ekphrastic image philosophy, one that comes after the understanding that images are capable of not only illustrating and describing, but also theorizing themselves, even on their own terms, even as they bring themselves into resolution for the first time. So basically, we don't consider images just as a representation of something else. We now have to deal with images as them being themselves. Does that make sense?
Sort of.
Sort of. Yeah,
What do you mean by being
it's a
themselves?
complicated thing. Sorry.
But what do you mean by being themselves, perhaps, is a better question.
So, for
So they're
example,
not just a representation, right?
yeah,
They are like self-aware, because when it says that images are capable of not only illustrating, describing, but theorizing themselves. So I'm assuming this means that there is a certain self-awareness attached to that.
yes, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So one of the things with images now is, like, when you think, for example, of memes, like, memes tend to reference themselves or
Yeah.
other things that are like, how do I say this? Hold on. So, how do I put this? Okay, let's break this down easier. So, first of all, what the hell is post-ekphrastic, right? Um,
Hmm.
so it's thinking about images like paintings and photographs after the understanding that they can do more than just show or describe something, right? So Nyan Cat is Nyan Cat. Nyan Cat has you know what Nyan Cat is?
Yes.
The cat with the
Yes.
pop tart. Okay, so
Yeah.
it's itself, like, it's not describing a real cat. It's not describing something else. It's just itself, right?
Hmm.
Okay. So ekphrastic usually means describing one form of art through another form of art, like describing a painting in a poem. So something that's put as ekphrastic means thinking about images as a new way after we've already described them in other art forms. So
So it's a change in medium then, um, essentially.
yeah, yeah, they have their own sense of making sense and meaning even without words or other art forms. They're independent of anything else.
Hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
they can communicate their own ideas without any help. So images are more than just visuals. They're not just pretty pictures. They have their own depth and meaning that goes beyond what we see on the surface. Images can speak for themselves. They have the ability to convey ideas, emotions, and messages without needing words or explanations from other sources. So when you see, is this a butterfly? And you see, and it's a transformer or something, it's describing an emotion, a confusion, but it doesn't need to have the traditional indicators or significant or symbols and signs,
Signifiers.
right? Signifiers, thank you. That
Mhm.
that a normal artwork would have, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes you send a meme and or even an emoji, like, and people immediately know. Like you've seen this thing that looks like this. This is not. What do you think this one means?
Okay, so this is a whole debate. It's either, some people are saying it's either the praying emoji
Yeah,
or the thank you emoji or the clap emoji with someone else. But for those people that say it's the clap emoji with someone else, like the high five, I disagree. Because if you notice the two emoji hands, they have the same color and the same shirt color. So it
yeah.
can't be two
But the
different people.
ISO itself calls it a high five.
Yeah, but it's not.
But the ISO, which is the organ, no, we're gonna be here. But see what I mean? Like it's defining itself upon itself, right? Like
Hmm.
you have no reference for it in the future. Like even its meanings are not what it's representing,
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
um, we're literally analyzing it and understanding it on its own. Same with the peach,
Yeah.
right? Like obviously there's some skeuomorphic ideation there, but at the same time, like it's still not the same. And when you combine them, they stop being images and they become literal language. So
Hmm. They do. Yeah.
yeah,
That's absolutely right. Hmm.
so they're different in how. So we're perceiving images different than we used to. But in a way, it
Definitely.
is true. In another way, it's not because it's sort of going back to medieval people, like when people were not literate and they understood everything through images itself, not through words, right? But it's different in a way. So I forgot that I had this one, which is nani. Does that mean? Uh, but yeah, so we've already done that. Um, no, there's. I forgot I had this definition. So how we present images, recognizing this as dynamic expressive entities with their own unique capacities for communication and meaning making, which we already discussed. And then, so this is another thought, right? Like by sheer virtue of making things, the critically self-aware internet user makes post-internet art. This may or may not have the look and feel of Lunagard's objects that are objects, which is a really interesting thing. He's dealing similarly to Lunagard's digital art is very topographical in a way, but he was trying
Hmm.
to do images for the so what we said here, post ekphrastic images. So they're similar, they're related. So I would argue that the Lundgaard's work is post internet. I don't know if he would agree. It's different. And then
Hmm.
Fierket pointed out that post-internet objects and images are developed with concern to the particular materiality as well as their vast variety of methods, presentation, and dissemination, which is what you were saying, that it's different new mediums, which
Hmm.
ties it back. That comes from a book called, I thought I had the credit there. Um,
That's in, huh.
hold on, I
That
have it.
reminds me of Lev Manovich's Language of New Media, actually,
Yeah.
because he talks about this idea of how one format, let's call it a format,
Mhm.
but this can be subbed into a medium of sorts. It can be transcoded into something else. And I think this is also what's happening here.
Here.
Um, yeah, I think this is what's happening here with digital medium, right? That it can be transcoded into completely different medium or a visual representation of something else too. And that's what we're seeing nowadays as well.
Yeah, exactly. So this, I got that quote from the Image Object Post Internet by R.T. Vierkant. Really good text. I highly recommend you give it a read. Well, you as in our audience and also you. Uh, Everyone should read it. It's really interesting what they're talking about. the methods presentation. And yeah, obviously, like you cannot talk about new media and media in general without talking about Lev Manovich, right? Um,
We don't have to spend so much time on love
no.
in this particular case.
So one of the things that Marisa Olsen said is, "I'm scheming on how to take the emphasis off the internet and technology, but keep my ideas intact." Oh no, that's sorry, that's not it. That's it's Fierkant, I think. Nonagard. Is Lonergan's, this is the objects that are not objects. So he's trying to take the emphasis off the internet and technology, but keep my ideas intact. He reported objects that aren't objects. I got a couple of books and t-shirts in the works. Right now I'm really into text, not visually, typographically, just text. And lots of list. Internet aware art. That's what he was. This discussion was very long and they caught a lot of things from it. But basically, this is what I was talking about before. Um, his work, his webpage is literally a directory structure. You click on it and it takes you to the work. You go back. There's no interface. There's no nothing. It's
Mhm,
very early internet in a way. So
mhm,
um, he could be considered one of the first post-internet artists without even wanting to be one, or knowing that
mhm.
that was a thing. I think that's more accurate. But yeah, one of the things about post-internet art is that it's no longer about technology or the internet itself. Like it's not about how HTML works. It's not about how CSS works, which is what Yodi were doing, right? It's not about
Mhm.
exposing the code behind the pretty part of the website, right? It's not about,
The interface. Yeah.
sorry.
No, keep going. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of like that, like what he's trying to do. And it's one thing that I think I have been trying to push as well, this idea that, okay, well, yeah, we have, but I've tried to do it on everything, not just on the internet. Yeah, it's cool that you're using VR. Yeah, it's cool that you're using sensors. I don't care about that. Show me what the artistry, like what is the art? What is the message? What are the poetics behind your work? Otherwise, you're just playing with toys. Right? I know that that's gonna cause some people, how dare you? But honestly, I think it is interesting that you're playing with these things, but at the same time, you have to have a message. You have to have an artistic idea of what you're doing, right? And then we have this other one, which is new media is announced as a mode to narrowly focus on the specific workings of novel technologies, what I just said, rather than sincere exploration of cultural shifts in which that technology plays only a small role. It can therefore be seen as relying too heavily on the specific materiality of its media. Conceptualism, in theory, if not practiced, presumes a lack of attention to the physical substrate in favor of methods of disseminating the artworks as idea, image, context, and instruction. Post-internet art instead exists somewhere between these two poles. Post-internet objects and images are developed with concern to their particular materiality as well as their vast variety of methods of presentation and dissemination. So it doesn't abandon it completely, but at the same time, it's not its sole focus, which is one of
Mhm.
the things that, I've been fighting for. And because when you take conceptualism, like it's defined here, you end up with zombie formalism. Right? Remember that period?
Yeah.
Like the first painting made with a fire extinguisher, the first painting made with the blood of a raccoon or something, or the artist's blood or whatever. It was very, even though it's supposed to be like about the concept, it ended up being about the methods. It was annoying. And then, for example, so if we're gonna talk, were you a Tumblr person?
I was, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I love Tumblr just because of its, images, and that's what it was based on essentially,
Yeah.
which I always found interesting. I don't know. I love Tumblr for
So
sure.
where did you fall in this?
Where did I fall in this? Oof. I think either, you know, this reminds me a little bit of DeviantArt as well.
Yeah.
So uh, I was definitely under like the art, pop culture,
Yeah.
which I don't see here.
Yeah, that's hipster.
But mostly the art and pop culture for sure.
Oh
Yeah.
no, pop culture. Yeah, no, you were most probably on the fandom continent. I was definitely on
Yeah.
the hipster content side. I was older, so I was more on the look at the fashion, look at the music, and let's discuss deeply about gender politics and all that stuff. Um,
Yeah.
So yeah, but still, like this is an accurate representation of Tumblr. This is a very popular image. I don't really know who made it. There's like several versions. This is the one I found the most amusing. But this explains a lot of what I'm saying. Like these people, and this is what we have to consider. These people, we're engaging in this. They're between 40, like the oldest ones of us, and the younger ones are like 27. So they're right in the maker period. Like these are the people that are making culture and art right now. Obviously
Mm-hmm.
not at the highest levels, but it's still, you know what I mean. And I think we're ignoring that in art history when we think about who is making culture right now. Yes, there's a lot of Gen X still very influential, but we're starting to push them out. And that's why post-internet art is becoming a more visible thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like this is very Gen X, right? Or not? What do you think?
Yeah, I would say so. Well, you know what this reminds me of though? And we talked about this either in an episode or just like in person. Um, we talked about what is it called? Oh my gosh. It is the pixel aesthetic, but this is
Yeah,
also like vaporware aesthetic as well,
this is
which I
vaporware.
found really, yeah, which is very interesting, but it's cringy for me because I don't know. It makes me cringe because it's something that people as people presume that this aesthetic was what made up the 80s and
Oh
90s.
yeah, no.
Exactly.
It was all
And
wood
it's
paneling and mustard color. Oh my god. It was horrible.
but
Yeah,
it's interesting
it's a
though
fake
because it's
nostalgia.
yeah, it's fake nostalgia is exactly what it is. Fake nostalgia just completely wrong. I don't know. That's a whole topic essentially, right?
Yeah, vaporware. This is vaporware. This is not that old, but it is digging into this very like it's very 90s. Even though it's trying
Hmm.
to be 80s, in truth, it's very 90s. This is by
Yeah.
Ramona and Xavier, also known as Vectroid. They do a lot of work like this. But as I kind of flashed quickly, there's not everybody agrees with this post-internet art. Some of the criticisms are pretty rough. So, no, here's the mass intelligentsia, first of all. So it was made popular by Melvin Bragg, and this is what I'm criticizing. I really love this because it's what Karl Marx could not anticipate was the anti-bourgeois intellectual of his day were the first representatives of what has become in our time a mass intelligentsia, a group progressing many of the cultural and political characteristics of a social class in Marx's sense. By intelligentsia, I mean those people engaging vocationally in the production, distribution, interpretation, criticism, and inculcation of cultural values, aka, and I'm gonna shoot myself, influencers. Thoughts?
No, you're absolutely right. But the one thing I want to point out though is something. See, I don't know if I completely agree with this because yes, influencers are the ones that are shaping, producing, distributing, but what's behind the influencers?
Okay, so first of all, like we have to make a distinction between influencers like Jake Paul, which are just cartoon characters at this point, and very despicable ones, and things like, for example, I don't know if you know this person on TikTok called the trans handy person, and it's this trans woman who is it's their job is a handy person, like fixing things. So what they do is that they have this TikTok channel, and people send them questions like, "Hey, my sink is broken. I don't know what to do," and she teaches them how to fix it. So it's become this cultural collection of knowledge that this person does through conversations through TikTok. So I think there is a distinction between there's different kinds of influencers. There's history
For sure.
influencers that are actually educated. Things like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who sometimes speaks when he shouldn't, but whatever. Um,
Uh-huh.
like obviously, it's not all perfect, but it wasn't back then.
No.
I mean, if we're gonna go there, Lacan was definitely more in the Jake Paul side of things.
Okay.
And he has a following to this day. And they
Mm-hmm.
will tell you you are not reading him correctly, and that you have to be integrated into the cult of Lacan.
Mm-hmm.
There's literally institutes to teach you how to read Lacan, because apparently
Mm-hmm.
it's not possible to do it on your own.
It's not the easiest, no, for sure. I have a
Eh,
couple of Lacan books.
I
But,
have I
but
have
no,
one.
what I was going to say
Oh, okay.
is no, no, no. I think you're right. We should make a distinction. However, I'm very nihilistic and cynical about this because the more I peruse these influencers, the more I'm thinking, well, what is behind these influencers? And that's the products that they're selling that you want to consume. So I don't know if I agree with this completely. I think at the end of the day, with some influencers, especially the ones that are making money out of this, which is not in itself a bad thing, obviously, but the system of capitalism and is definitely at play here because the companies are the ones, facilitating the products that they are going to then put into, their content for us to consume. So that's just me, though.
I agree with you, but the thing, the counter to that is anti-Foucault powers activate. Uh, Foucault also spoke without like knowing the whole thing sometimes, especially when it came to
What
the
do you mean?
Ayatollah, for example. Like
What do you
Foucault was
mean?
so deep in the down to America, death to America camp that he ended up supporting things that weren't as good as they pretended to be. Like the only difference between Foucault and, let's say, Neil deGrasse Tyson was the reach, right? In terms of like global reach. Yeah, you could read
Mhm.
Foucault's things, but mostly Foucault became distributed through intellectuals and things like that. Nowadays, Foucault would have a TikTok channel and he would be talking about like his thoughts on power and relationship and power relationships and spaces and how different spaces exist that are not real, but they are real and all these things. So I do see the parallels. I do think, I mean, Foucault got paid for his talks. Lacan would charge a lot of money for his talks. So
Mhm.
I don't think money itself is a problem. There is a huge problem though with people speaking out of their wheelhouse. I'm guilty of it. Everybody's guilty of it. Everybody has an opinion, and sometimes we don't think when. But the difference between me and, let's say, Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, is that my audience is like 75 people, whereas
Mhm.
his is way bigger. And the same thing applied with them. So yeah, I mean, there are interests in the back. Yeah, there are people who are definitely financing some thoughts, but we've seen that before. We've seen think tanks from Nixon era. Was it Nixon or Reagan? I think it was Reagan. During the Reagan era, when think tanks started shaping policy, and they would have people as speakers in universities and things, and they would pay them to go on interviews on 60 Minutes and all these things. So I don't think it's different. I think it's because of the reach is more dangerous, though.
Oh yeah. And I definitely agree with you on that. I definitely am not saying that my worry is the types of products that, we can talk about artifice what we want, but sometimes these products are vaporware. To go
Oh,
back to that, you know what I mean? Like people selling, I don't know, you name it, like
that's
gummies for whatever. You know what I mean? Like gummies for these ridiculous things and just false products to make money also. That and the reach that they have, right? This global reach that you now have thanks to the internet
yeah.
is what is scary, but also what is making up our culture nowadays too. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. I do think that this is a historical problem as well. Like, I mean, the term snake oil salesman
Oh
is
yeah,
not new,
definitely.
right? Like, people have been peddling fake medical things. People have been peddling fake. because people have been peddling all these things before.
Oh
Uh,
yeah,
I
for
think
sure.
the biggest problem is the mass part of it.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
it's so massive, it reaches a lot of more people. And one of the things that did not work out about the internet, I think that's why we have post-internet art now, is that we thought that having all the knowledge in the planet at our fingertips was going to fix things, when what we have is all the ignorance on the planet available at your fingertips. And usually it sells better because it sells you solutions. And
Yeah.
that's the problem. I
Yeah.
think the problem is when they sell you solutions. But
Yeah. No,
anyhow,
I completely agree with you. Yeah.
moving to this, because otherwise this is going to become a completely different philosophical conversation. It's been accused of being a term to market art. Like, oh, it's post
Mm-hmm.
internet. And it is. It is. I mean, at least for a while, it was a lot like a lot of people were like, oh, yeah, it's post internet. And it's because of its associations with postmodern or
Yeah.
post anything.
Definitely.
Because one of the ironies of attaching post to anything is that you are defining it by its past.
Yes, and that's my biggest criticism of many, which I'm not going to name all of them, but many things that are labeled as post something. It's you're assuming that there is a break from the past when you don't take into account, and I'm already thinking about something very particular. You don't take into account the influence and the reach that it has and perhaps continues to have in many cases, right? If there's no strict divorce that happens with post something, right? There are lingering effects as well, which,
Yeah,
yeah.
no. Well, one of the things is post is like, I don't know if you remember, if you were old enough for that time. No, I'm not joking. Where everything was a paradigm shift.
Oh, yes. Yes, 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 yes.
Yes. Okay. So I think post became the paradigm shift of today. That and
Mm-hmm.
disruption. Between those two terms, Jesus. They
I'm
became,
guilty of those.
yeah, I mean, all of us. I dislike those terms. You know, my dislike for liminal as well,
Liminality. Yeah.
liminality. And then today we're talking about how I dislike Anthropocene, which
Mm-hmm.
I know you're publishing something on that, but it's just the term.
Oh,
It's not the
thanks.
idea behind it, honestly. It's just that it's like cyber. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's just overused. That's what it is. It's overused, and I don't know. Like a lot of people use it just because to sound hip. Sometimes it is valid, but it's hard to know
Mm.
when you just read an abstract or like a conference, like the Times, and you're like, does this really need to be called Anthropocene?
They're buzzwords,
It
but
is
don't
a
you think
word.
these,
Yeah, that's what I don't like. I think that's what I don't like.
but
It's
don't
not
you
the
think
ideas behind it.
yeah, but no, what I was going to say is, don't you think these buzzwords are things that, so I'm a big believer that we have, and this is the case of all technologies in society and through history. We borrow terms from these technologies to describe things that we now use. So, for example, in the early 90s, you have the web, you have all of these different particular terms like cyber something, whatever. These were borrowed from science fiction novels like Neuromancer. Um, Nowadays, as much as there's pop culture, but because, and I'm a firm believer in this. Whereas before, let's put it this way. Whereas before we had in this particular case, cyberpunk novels like Neuromancer that influence things like terms like the Matrix, like jacking in, like all of these things that later influenced the movie The Matrix.
Mhm.
Now we have the internet that has influenced the way that our language works. And so things like buzzword is definitely a thing that we borrowed from technology and has been seeping into academia because believe it or not, when you look at an abstract, you have the abstract, you have the keywords.
Yes,
But why do you think you have keywords?
of course. Yeah, because it's
Because this is how we also find information on the internet through keywords.
yeah. Mic drop. Uh,
Mic drop.
mic drop.
True though. It's true.
Yeah, no, you got a point. Like, definitely, no argument there. Definitely, I think. Well, that you want to go into why academia is how it is. Uh,
No,
there's
no.
definitely a reason for how we ended up using buzzwords so much. But anyhow, yeah. So yeah, it is a term to market art. Definitely, it's something that sells. It's like, oh, it's catchy, right? And soon we'll have a new term that's going to replace it, and then we're going to have another one, and then whatever. But there's also other criticisms, right? Like, for example, post-internet art is about creating objects that look good online, photographed during under bright lights in the gallery's purifying white cube, a double for the white field of the browser window that supports the documentation, filter for high contrast and colors that pop. This sounds very similar to the criticisms that we had of the pop-up museums, right?
Definitely. Definitely.
However, I do not agree when it comes to artworks rather than experiences that are just meant to be experiences,
Mm,
right? Because, okay, so we're obviously reflecting an aesthetic, and it's the Instagram aesthetic, right? The thing is, and I've experienced this recently with finding a new place to live. Sometimes you see like an apartment and it's photographed in this magnificent way, and you get
oh
there
yeah.
and it looks like a dump, right?
Yeah.
But it's not art, right?
No.
However, art has an aesthetic component that it's supposed to be recognized. Yes, I know a lot of new media art tries to separate itself from aesthetics, but that in itself is an aesthetic.
Hmm.
So yeah, post-internet obviously is going to go a little bit beyond the bleak beige of computers of the 90s, right?
Hmm.
It's going to go beyond. You were showing me the picture of what was it, Documenta?
Documented 10. Yeah.
Documenta
Yeah.
10, and the way they displayed their new media art as a literal office cubicle,
Corporate
it was
office. Yeah.
dreary.
It was
And
awful. It's very sterile.
it was very sterile. It was very.
Horrible.
It did not look like an art gallery. It did not look as a place where you look at art. It just looked as somewhere where you sit down for 8 hours and you have someone tell you that you are not being productive.
Yeah.
Um, honestly. So
No, for sure.
in a way, yeah, it has to be flat. It is flashy because its nature is flashy because we don't. I mean, would you say the same thing about I don't know what's his name? The photographer we saw in New York, David LaChapelle.
Hmm.
His images are filtered for high contrast and colors that pop. He's
Yeah.
definitely not post-internet art because he's from the 80s. Does that make him less of an artist just because he has high contrast colors that pop and look really good in the gallery?
Hmm.
That's not
I
the
see what you
point.
mean.
Aesthetically, it's
Yeah.
aesthetically the point. Yeah, and it's also because he's referencing the Renaissance, which also had high contrast and colors that popped. Not as much as the
Yeah.
Baroque, but it still did. Um,
Hmm.
that does not make it any lesser work. It's like like we were saying, like yeah, Baroque is a reaction to Renaissance. Doesn't mean it's better or worse. It's just a reaction. So that's the first argument, and then you're gonna see the other one, which is the contradiction of the first one. Post internet art preserves the white cube to leech off its prestige. The same supporters might also say that post internet art offers a critique of how images of art circulate online in service of the art market. But unless the artist does something to make the documentation strange and emphasize the difference between the work's presence online and its presence in the gallery, it's hard to believe that anything close to a critique is happening. This one is harder for
Yeah.
people because it's saying like it looks good in the gallery. Well, yeah, I thought it didn't. Make up your mind, right?
No, well, I think what I'm also thinking about in this particular criticism, right,
Yeah.
um, is how, and we can sure talk about Documenta here, but how sometimes works that exist online have to be transcoded, if we want to use the fancy term again,
Mhm.
um, into a gallery space. Like how they have to, what's another word for it? They have to reflect the gallery space aesthetic, which is very interesting. Um, translate. That's the word I was
Mm.
wanting to use. You have to translate it into something, into a different medium, into a different space, into a different aesthetic. And I have a very hard time with that because some works do not going to say that they don't belong in a museum gallery setting, but sometimes they just really don't. Sometimes they're critical pieces, they're not experimental, but they're performative, like they're participatory. And it's very hard for that, something that uniquely exists in a different space, like the public space, for example. We don't have to just talk about internet art, um, has to be translated for the art gallery space. And then this comes with a lot of issues, I think, because you're translating one form into another,
Mm.
right? And you have museum, and you're better at this than I am, but you have to light it a certain way. You have to design the exhibition a certain way. Whereas online, the internet artworks, that you don't have those issues necessarily, right?
Mm. I don't know.
Not in the same way. Not in the same way that you would
Not
when
in the
you
same way.
display something.
Absolutely not. Yeah, that.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
don't. So I think that you just peeled this thing wide open, and I think I can understand it better. There's like a little bit of a misunderstanding. Like creating, I think that it's more natural to put an artwork in a digital artwork in a gallery space, in a physical, real world physical space, than it is to take it outside of its original webpage or whatever it is and put it into an online exhibition. Oh my god, it's so complicated. Like, because let's say, for example, one of the works I had in what's the last show that we did with New Media Caucus, the Judson Morrissey and the Wagner Mendoza grants. Uh, so, for example, there's this work by Chenny Choi, which is about um, Alzheimer's, right? But it had to be shown alongside Rosensari's work about the Mecca, no, the Kaaba, and how it's been commercialized and exploited. And it also had
Hmm.
to do with this other work by I forgot her name. But okay, the artwork was about the attacks that happened. I can't remember where it was against like Asian women run massage parlors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Hmm.
So you have these three works that had to be shown together. If they were in their original web pages, that's easy. When I had to pull them, rip them out of there, and put them into one single gallery space, it required just as much, if not more, consideration of space than it did of physical space. Because in physical space, I have three options. I can set up a big TV, give you headphones, put the work, and give you a keyboard.
Hmm.
I can give you a VR headset for the other one. And for the last one, I can give you a web page on a laptop on a touchscreen or something, and you can navigate it in the gallery space. I can make it look very nice. It looks very respectful, and it would have required like half of my brain power.
Hmm.
So I think that there's this misunderstanding of new media where people assume like it's ethereal, so it can just exist wherever in the web. But once it's physical, it's a problem. And that's because of a limited interpretation of what how things can be shown. But we're gonna move to the third one, and then I'm gonna show you something. So the last one is post-internet art objects look good in a browser just as laundry detergent looks good in a commercial. Detergent isn't as stunning at a laundromat, and neither does post-internet art shine in the gallery. It's boring to be around. It's not really sculpture. It doesn't activate space. It's often frontal, designed to preen for the camera's lens. It is an assemblage of some sort, and there's little excitement in the way objects are placed together, and nothing is well made except for the mass market products in it. So again, what we were talking about, there's like this assumption that it's not made for galleries, and yeah, it is not. It's not, but it's in a way it's easier than having it online outside of its original context. Um, if you see the last exhibition we made, one of the problems with that one is that the artworks are generative, right?
Hmm.
And in their normal space, they exist as independent images. I mean, so you open the page, or artworks more likely. So you open a page, you see the one work, and that's fine. If I did it on physical space, I would give each one of them a screen. But when I had
Yeah.
to do it in one exhibition space, they all exist at the same time, they all load, and they slow down your computer a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So there's technical issues that make it harder for them to exist online in a way, and ironically in a way. And honestly, I think they would look so much better in 65-inch screens in or projections inside of a space that I willingly turned into a black space. I added walls and I took you through this spiritual journey physically, supported by
Mm-hmm.
that virtual work. And the other thing is, we keep saying that we don't know how to present artworks online, digital works in the real space, but we have the answer. Arcades. We've been doing arcades since the 80s. We
Mm-hmm.
have TV displays on shops. We just have to look outside of the art world for the solutions. This is actually an art exhibition. This is from the Victorian Albert.
So I
And
have
yeah,
a question.
yeah, hit me.
No, this is not like
Hit me, I just mean tell me the question.
yeah. No, I know.
Ah,
I'm trying to word it nicely. I think the biggest problem, maybe it's not a question, or maybe it is. Okay, so I think the biggest issue with things like this, like the arcade style presentation of artworks, is simply that you, people assume that there is and might have the idea that there's no legitimacy because it's outside of the museum context. I'm not arguing it. I'm just saying
I
I think
understand
that's
what
going
you're
to be,
saying. Yeah, I mean, it's an uphill battle, definitely.
yeah,
One of the biggest issues with this is, well, we're already treated as the redheaded stepchild, anyways, because oh, computers, the computer does everything on its own. So, why do we keep fighting to be recognized, like and legitimized by these things, right?
because the art world is an institution,
Yeah,
you
I
know?
know, but we keep talking about breaking barriers and breaking outside of the institution, and we keep crawling back.
We
At
do.
some
Yeah.
point, we have to say enough is enough, and this is how it's shown, and this is how it works. And the biggest support I can give to that is museums are slowly dying. Kids
Hmm.
don't want to go to them. And the other thing, and this is something I keep fighting with museum people, especially with marketing and education mostly. A day, like a person's day, is usually broken down into work, like life things to do, and free time.
Yeah.
Museums don't get a special slot in there. They compete
Hmm.
with the soccer game, the Fallout TV series, by the way, watch it. They compete with Call of Duty. They compete with so many things, and they refuse to grow. They refuse to accept that it's no longer the 1900s. The kids, we know kids run, we know kids make noise, we know kids want to touch, and yet we keep designing things for Victorians.
Hmm.
And that's a big fight in exhibition design for every single exhibition designer. Like you want to do things and someone comes in and drags you back into white walls. The white walls were made as a protest to the salon. Now we have to protest the white cube, but we keep falling back into it. You go to the most, well, I don't want to say avant-garde because there's no really an avant-garde nowadays, but the most newest artist spaces created by artists for artists. And what do you see?
Where walls.
White walls.
Yeah.
So I don't care about that anymore. I want to do this. And I know the curator that did this, and it's a really good job he did. And it's a
Hmm.
really nice exhibition. And kids were interested. And you can have serious things. Where is it? Why is it not moving? Oh, there we go. You can also have serious things next to it. This is the same exhibition.
Hmm.
Right? The first one was where you played things that were actually on show. And this one shows you the art behind the making of a video game. So it's the
Hmm.
concept art, the sketches by the artists, by the game creator, by the game director. And kids were interested in this because then they see how these things are made. So they could see the games, they could see the pretty pictures, but they could also see how the sausage is made, right? They had a holistic view of game making. And little kids, like, and well, I'm saying little kids, but actually, I mean preteens to teens, which are the hardest audience to reach. They were interested. They were really
Hmm.
interested, something that you don't usually see in a museum about art and design. So there are solutions. And then here's some examples of these things. This is, again, synthwave. It's already feeling a little bit dated, mostly because of those prompts that, like, the Windows
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. The Windows prompts, yeah.
and the E. Nobody knows what that E is anymore.
But
You know what it is, right?
isn't that Internet Explorer?
Yeah. I don't think I've seen anyone use that. And it doesn't even exist anymore, actually. Now it's Edge, which is different.
Edge, yeah,
And then
yeah.
there's Twitter.
Hmm.
Then we have these, which is more like playing with chroma. But you can see like how not this is Objects. It's from 2011 by R.T. Vierkant, the artist we were talking about, the one that did the post-internet object. And
Yeah.
yeah, so they're working with objects, colors, shapes, ideas, concepts. And then there's this thing. This is Room 101 versus Ange Chung. This was a really interesting performance.
Hmm.
Have you heard of it?
No.
Okay, so this was a Anshi Chung, I think, was a politician, and they were trying to do like a digital town square back when Second Life was still relevant to most
Hmm.
normal people. It's still relevant to certain groups, but not anymore like it
Yeah.
used to be, right? And if you don't know what Second Life is, it's very hard to explain, but it's what nowadays crypto bros call a metaverse. So it's a
Yeah.
space where
Definitely.
people
Exactly.
and you can create community, but it's very free. It's very creative. It's allowed to do things, and yeah, you can buy land and everything, but you don't need to buy Bitcoin or be involved in all that nonsense. It still exists, and you can actually download mods to make it look better. Anyhow, so they did this town square, and CNET was doing like an interview with this person, and they had like their very nice area, and they had invited people, reporters, and everything to watch it. But they failed to do their due diligence, and they didn't block user spawned objects. So a group of protesters that were not agreeing with this person's politics and ideas and everything loaded into the area. And when the interview started, they started tossing around dildos.
Okay.
It was a political protest inside of a video game.
That's
So,
really interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it is a performance. I mean, I don't know if it's a performance or a happening. I'm still murky on how to define those two.
You're debating on the specifics.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But anyhow, and this is absolutely post-internet art. It's not net art. It's art that's happening on the internet, but it's not about the technology. It's not about how it works. It's about doing a protest on somebody's. It's more yes men than it is
Oh, the yes man.
Yodi, right?
Yeah.
It's more like that. It's more Guerrilla Girls than it is I don't know, Jeff Koons. But it can also be more silly things. For example, Seth Price's Double Hunt, which is a cave painting from Lascaux, I think. It is. It just says it. It's printed on a PVC tube. And it's a new way of seeing things. And it's also not in the internet. It's using technology, yes. It's using the screen print, like the downloading the image and then creating the negative and then but the rest is traditional techniques. So it's a combination. And it's not about the
Hmm.
internet, but it is very mired. I mean, there's a reason we use this green. I don't know why we've come to the conclusion that hot pink and green is the colors of the internet.
Well, because isn't
Yeah,
green the hyperlink? Green is the
I
hyperlink.
guess. No, hyperlinks are blue or used to be blue.
Hyperlinks are blue?
Yes?
I thought they were green now.
Are you
Well, we
colorblind?
can debate this. Huh?
Are you colorblind?
No, no, no. Yeah. Anyway.
Anyhow, yeah. So we have this green look and the hot pink, and it's like upon like it exists everywhere that you have these things.
Yeah.
Anyhow, but yeah, one of the things that we have to remember is that post-internet art does not have to be on the screen, and I think that's one of
Hmm.
the mistakes number three makes a lot. I think that's also something that we need. So my definition of post-internet is that post-internet art is not a style; it's a condition of existence. Okay, it
Hmm.
is familiar
It's
to
an
those.
ontology.
Sorry,
It's an ontology.
an ontology, absolutely. It's unfamiliar to those not involved in online culture. Tumblr, GeoCities, MySpace, early YouTube. It's also an encapsulation of a worldview, an aesthetic approach, and cultural sensibilities. And that is
Mhm.
why I think there's so much misunderstanding behind it, because it's done by people. I don't know if you've run into this, but I know a lot of people in my field, not in my field, in art history, not
Yeah.
specifically media. I don't watch TV. I don't watch popular movies. I only watch French existentialism.
Okay.
And those people end up running museums, running galleries, running fairs, and all that. And that's how you get a whole art world that does not understand post-internet art. And that's where I stop. I don't know if you want to add things.
No, no, no. That's good. I love it. I love it.
It's an ontology. I hadn't thought of it that way.
It's always, you gotta think about it. It's either an epistemology or an ontology.
Touche. Okay. Anyhow, so this is my and Connie's ideas on post-internet art and what
Deep dive. Yeah.
a deep dive or deepish dive. It's impossible to go into it like completely. Um, I was very much debating putting Badger somewhere in here,
I'm very disappointed you did not put Badger. It's the first
or
thing that came to mind.
or the unicorns.
Yeah.
Don't tell me, it's a magical Pterodon. You remember that one?
Not specifically, but I do remember Badger
It's
because
actually
that
made
was my golden years.
Oh yeah, no, the unicorns are actually making a comeback. You see it a lot in YouTube now. No, not YouTube, TikTok. Anyhow,
Oh,
so with that said, I want to thank you all for watching these episodes. This is the first one that's actually going to be distributed as a podcast on YouTube Music. So you can now find us like that. You don't have to look at us. You can just listen to us while you're driving, which is safe.
yes.
Plus, it's less data, so you can listen to us more easily. Also, we want to thank you for the patience. We've been having a crazy year, all of us. So many things have happened, and
Definitely.
apologies for not transmitting as often as we would like, but we'll try and keep bringing you our little discussions. Anything you want to add?
Perfect. No, just very thankful for our listeners. Please like and subscribe and comment in the little box, and just listen to us now on the podcast channel. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.
Bye.